Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Extraction and Consumer Product Creation, Choosing the Right Supplier. My name is Eric Sandy, and I'm the digital editor of Cannabis Business Times. From extraction equipment and technologies through post-processing, distillation, and product creation, it's extremely important that businesses choose the right supplier and partner to their business to ensure success and state-of-the-art operations. Today, we're going to be learning from members of the Agrify extraction division. That includes Precision Extraction, Cascade Sciences, Pure Pressure, and Lab Society about that very important topic, how to forge those beneficial partnerships with suppliers. Before we begin with today's presentation, I just want to make a few quick notes. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. If you click that, it'll open the Q&A box. Feel free to type your questions for our presenters into the Q&A box as the presentation's going on. We're going to try to get to as many questions as possible on the back end of the presentation. Also know that we are recording today's presentation, both the audio and video. That'll certainly include the slides, and we'll be distributing that link to all registrants via email in the coming days here. With that being said, very pleased to welcome Mike Maybach, Vice President of Product Management at Agrify, and Ben Britton, Vice President of Innovation at Agrify.
Thanks, Eric.
Doing today. Thanks for having us, Eric. Really appreciate this. Excellent. So thank you all for being here today. We're excited to talk to you guys. Obviously, there's been a lot of cool things happening in the market. One being that Agrify came in and started joining up some of the, in my opinion, some of our better brands in the space, which is really exciting for us. The main subject of this presentation is going to be the importance of selecting the right products and partner for your lab build. So, a lot of times when you're coming to spend a lot of money on the capital expenditure side to build a business, there's a million different ways to go. You've got all these different companies with all these different sales pitches. There's many different ways to go about purchasing. One of the things that we've done, obviously, in all of our individual businesses, but now together as a larger conglomerate, is really try to prepare a full-rounded solution for our customers so that it's simpler for you to be successful and we're in it with you from the beginning.
Thanks, Mike. So one of the things to consider when you're starting a cannabis extraction business is, where are you? What are your target? Who is your target market? This is extremely important because as legislation has dictated within the United States, we are looking at each new state coming on as kind of a new opportunity that grows from a very similar place and goes through repeatable phases that we see time and time again, starting out with everything leaning towards flower, and then over time building that need and desire for concentrates and more complex products. And so you have to understand which phase of the market you're coming into, and we're obviously well equipped to help you along that process, whether you want to start in at early phase or if you're coming in late, maybe you can have a very pointed strategy that we can take. So there's lots of approaches that we can have, but the importance is looking at where you are in that market and how early you are into entering that market. So then choosing the right equipment. We are going to be, we're looking at how much volume can you supply and what is the demand in that area. A lot of customers come to us saying they would like to make a certain amount of concentrate, a certain amount of edibles, vaporizers, whatever it might be. And that number might come from their business plan or their desires, but it doesn't necessarily fit the market and what that market can hold. And so we can help you look at that, look at where you're planning to open business and what products are desired in that area, both locally and on a larger scale. And then matching the equipment to that production need. So that's extremely important because you don't want to be sitting there with equipment that's underutilized or vice versa, bursting at the gills, just trying to get by, right? So matching that throughput, we have lots of really good data and tools that we can use to predict the time, the money, the effort that goes into making specific SKUs. So you're not starting from scratch. We're eliminating a lot of that guesswork. So how much product you need is a lot of times dictated by gardens and local grows, what they can actually supply. And a lot of times licensees may want to be, or at least think they want to be vertically integrated, where they're growing, processing, and potentially selling in a dispensary, doing all three or maybe two of the three. But when you do the math, a lot of times you realize that this grow that you think you could fit in this portion of your building, you might churn through that in processing in a week. And now you've got the rest of the month to figure out, or the next couple months before your next harvest, what are you going to do and where are you going to process that material? So there's different ways that we can batch process for other manufacturers locally and work on partnerships there, but also just making sure that you have that supply to meet your demand. And then also space requirements. That's a huge one. A lot of times this happens backwards for some reason. People come in with, a space and a goal, and then they're coming in and asking, okay, well, what equipment do I need? How am I going to hit these numbers? And sometimes the space works, but a lot of times it's too big or too small. And so coming in with a plan and talking to us or somebody with this type of experience early can really help save time and money and headache overall when you lock yourself into a 3-year lease on a building that is a fraction of the size you need. And then good manufacturing practices we'll get on a little bit later, but different requirements depending on where you're located. Specifically Canada, really hot and heavy on GMP. And so that's going to require more work on your end to make sure that you're compliant and providing consistent, repeatable processes and that they're traceable. So we'll get into that just a little bit more here. And so part of this presentation and why this is all important is selecting the right supplier really makes a big difference here, because instead of piecemealing things together, we can talk about this from a meta perspective, hit it from a larger strategy, and make sure that you're successful at every stage along the way. So when it comes to supplier selection specifically, obviously you're looking at post-sale support and warranties. That's a big one, right? Making sure that your equipment is going to stay operational, or that during your periodic maintenance that you can actually get parts. There's a lot of supply chain issues. And one thing that we pride ourselves on is making sure that we have all the spare parts, consumables that you could ever need in stock, ready to go. So that's a really big piece. We'll be talking about that a little bit later as well. And then choosing based on how that relationship works with you, making sure that you have a partner that you trust and that you can call up when you've got an issue, and that they're not going to blow you off, or you're not going to be able to get a hold of them, is extremely difficult in the cannabis industry. Something that we've prided ourselves on is just being available and having a team that's sole purpose is to find solutions to your problems. And that's something that we're really proud to offer here at Agrify. And we're really building a bigger team, Mike and I, to be able to answer these really specific questions and process issues that our customers are encountering. And sometimes it's just development, and they're coming out with something that's never been done before, and they want our help with that. And that's something that we're totally willing and able to do. Both on-site and remote help. available. And so just feel free to reach out to us. We will find the solution for you.
Yeah, and real quick, if you go back, Ben,
Yeah.
one of the biggest things that I think you should be looking for in a supplier is elimination of bottlenecks in your process and that single point of contact. At Lab Society, that was kind of our model from really early on. I don't know if any of you have done business with us previously, but having someone that, instead of sourcing equipment from all these different suppliers where each one of them has one way of doing something, right? They have one way of calculating a throughput, one way of doing solvent recovery, one way, whatever the step is. Working with one supplier with a sales and solutions architect that can actually create this system for you that doesn't have bottlenecks, that has some scalability built in, and you don't have to talk to 10 different vendors is crucial in terms of just your timing into market.
Good point. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no, totally, man. And on that point, we are a one-stop shop. We are here for everything from initial extraction, in which we have a wide breadth of different technologies, which we're going to go over shortly with you, through efficiency and optimization. We can also help with the engineering compliance. The precision team, we have an entire design group that is dedicated towards doing facility design, workflows, all of that sort of stuff. We also can offer flexibility with payment terms, preferred pricing. There's a lot of benefits to working with a larger organization that has a lot of these facets built into it. And one of the biggest things that we've gained as joining up forces is being able to utilize each other's awesome platforms that we've all built. So everything from consulting and engineering through obviously the equipment itself. For more than a supplier, we are your partner. So now we're going to kind of just briefly talk about the process before getting into what each of our different segments cover. The first step is obviously going to be initial extraction, whether that be separation or actual extraction, whatever people want to call it. It's going to be removing the oleoresins from the biomass. There's obviously an array of different ways to do that, ranging from, solventless through different types of solvent-based extraction methods. That's going to be primarily where the bulk of technologies exist, and determining where your end products lie, like Ben was saying earlier, in terms of what does your market want to buy, what can it buy, what can it facilitate, is going to be crucial to choosing your initial extraction method. If you're doing hemp, you're probably going to be more looking at bulk extraction methods that will be more focused on creating lots of product, not necessarily high quality product, because field hemp isn't necessarily going to be treated super kindly through the process. Whereas if you're in a boutique OPC over in Colorado, where you have these beautiful flowers being grown, you might want to fresh freeze it and do a beautiful live rosin or live resin extract through one of our various extraction methods. From there, and obviously one thing I want to point out is these steps are not necessarily all required in order to get to the end goal. They are steps that are around, that are relatively standard in the industry and can be moved around based on the extraction method. But generally speaking, this is the flow. From initial extraction, we're going to want to precipitate out our fats. And the reason we'll do that is for several reasons. One, it helps with downstream processing, increases the potency, removes the fats from the product, and it also gives you another profit stream potentially. A lot of people haven't really delved into utilizing lipids as far as product formulation, but I can tell you just from personal experience, the fats and lipids that are present inside of cannabis are actually quite valuable. They have a lot of interesting properties that, in the US and in the world, oil, seed oil, and different lipids are actually quite valuable. So this is a profit stream for a lot of future processors. From there, we're going to filter out those solids, and we're going to separate. So we have a pure liquid extract and the fats separated out. We're going to recover solvent. Again, these steps are interchangeable based on your extraction method. The idea is that for winterization, we will use a solvent in order to precipitate out the fats, and then we recover the solvent later so it can be reused. From there, we'd want to degas our material, and degassing gets rid of all of the residual solvent, or at least most of it, some of the water, some of the lower boiling point compounds, in effort to have a simpler distillation. These steps are going to be primarily utilized if distillate is our end product. If we're trying to make live resin, live rosin, bubble hash, or something like that, we're literally just going to be doing step number one. But in order to get into the more refined products, which are great for product formulation, edibles, all sorts of different things, these other steps would ensue. And in the distillation step, we're going to be extracting the essential out of our crude oil. So cannabinoids are obviously the essential in this case. They're going to be the bulk of what we are extracting anyway. So our goal is through the distillation process to be in the mid to high, or low to mid 90s for potency, so that that product, it's relatively odorless, tasteless, and high purity, activated, ready for product formulation, whether it be edibles, cartridges, whatever that is. Now, if you're doing CBD, a lot of people will go into isolation and potentially even more cannabinoid separations, which is great for having prevalent minors. You see a lot of this more on the hemp side of things. Usually on the THC side, people are focused on the initial extracts. And then from there, of course, product formulation. So realistically, each one of these steps can be a necessary capital expenditure for your business. And the idea is that having all these steps allows you to produce a wide breadth of different products, everything from front-end extracts, high quality, really boutique extracts, through bulk distillate products that you can then formulate into higher profit yielding products for your business.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So diving into primary extraction on the solventless side of things, we're looking at some pretty awesome images here. So a lot of people are used to thinking about the cannabis flower itself as the fruit of the plant, but in the solventless world, we like to zoom in a little bit further. And here we have in the middle, we have a nice image zoomed in, but still not that tight, but showing the resin glands on top of the flower of the cannabis plant. And then here on the right, we're zoomed in even further. We're looking at the resin glands individually on top of the stalk here, and then connected to the flower here. And you can see that these are going to range in size, but they're somewhere in the realm of maybe 90 to 140, 200 microns in diameter. And the goal with solventless is to separate this resin from the plant without using chemicals or solvents. And so a lot of times what we're doing is we're using mechanical separation methods. And the way that I like to think about it is that instead of extracting, let's say we're making apple juice, instead of using the whole tree to make that apple juice, we're shaking the tree, we're knocking off all the apples, we're gathering them, and then we're going to make our juice from that. And so here on the left, we have these resin glands that have been separated using the ice water extraction process. We've separated them from the stalks here. And the way that we've done that is by taking advantage of the freezing point of the resin gland. So we're going to take fresh frozen material that's been pulled from the cannabis plant, immediately flash frozen. We're not going through the dry curing process. And then we're going to put that into a bath of ice water. And that ice water is going to soak into that flour, and it's going to make it flexible. And then that temperature of that ice water is going to freeze this resin gland. So when we agitate, we're going to be able to knock that resin gland off. It's going to break off, and then it's going to sink in our water because it's more dense. And so here's our family of products that we offer under the Pure Pressure brand for solventless extraction. We've got the Axis trichome separator here that's going to be doing this primary extraction of ice water. And this is going to be knocking those resin glands off the flower inside of this vessel. And then we're going to be using the pump here to transfer that slurry and filter it out. And then we're going to repeat that process 3 or more times. And we're going to be able to separate out these glands and then run them through a freeze dryer. And here we can see the process stepped out where we're washing. We're either doing that in an automated system or a hand system, depending on the size and scale that you have for your operation. Then we've got multiple freeze dryer options where we're pulling out that residual moisture. And then once we have those resin glands, we're going to press them. We're going to use heat and pressure to melt. We're going to use the heat to melt those resin glands, the pressure to mobilize that liquid, and then we're going to filter it using a really fine filtration media. And so this is going to give us what we call rosin. And this is the fresh frozen route to rosin or solventless oils. We also have one other method up our sleeve here where we can take dry cured flour instead of fresh frozen, and we'll just agitate that dry flour as is. And this is called sifting. And so instead of involving ice water, what we've got here is the dry cannabis plant, and we're agitating it, and those resin glands are breaking off directly, and we're capturing them. With the sifting process, you do tend to get additional plant particulates because we don't have the benefit of that water soaking into that flour and preventing the fracture of that plant. So we do end up getting a little more green, a little bit more undesirable materials that come through with the sifting process that we then will filter out in the rosin press. But generally speaking, we're going to end up with maybe a higher yield, but maybe a little bit lower quality. So depending on what we're going for, we have this strategy as well. And then handing it off to Mike here to talk about the precision extraction solutions that we have available.
So that precision, we've obviously the core focus historically has been hydrocarbon extraction systems, alcohol extraction systems, all solvent-based extraction systems. So what's really beautiful about having both of these things in your facility is that when it comes to the solventless separations, not all material will wash well. And you probably have heard that term, tossed around. What does washing well mean? And Ben, if you wouldn't mind, enlighten us on what washing well means.
Yeah, thanks. I did forget to bring that up, so thanks for mentioning it. So when it comes to material, going back to this slide, this would be an ideal resin gland for solventless extraction. It's nice, round, and bulbous. It's large, and when we agitate this flour, it's going to separate pretty easily. But not all resin glands are created equal, and we've had the benefit of many years of illicit grows unintentionally promoting the growth and the genetics that promote a better trichome structure. They were growing to get a higher THC content. They didn't really know what they were doing, but unintentionally, they're creating a bigger, better trichome head. And some of these strains are more suited for these mechanical means of extraction, while others, they might not want to separate with this agitation method. And that's where it really you might get an absolute garbage yield in ice water extraction, and then you run it through the same exact material. Instead, you run it through a solvent extractor and you get a phenomenal yield. And it's because we're dealing with that actual trichome structure. And so knowing where to put your material is important, because a lot of times solventless concentrates can drive a higher price tag in the dispensary. So if you have a material that washes well, it does make sense to wash it and make those products and those SKUs. However, not all material washes well. And in that scenario, you cannot be caught with your pants down. You have to have a solution for that. And that's where there's so many other opportunities that Mike can talk about.
Perfect. So with that material that either doesn't wash well, or maybe we know that there's a certain amount of SKUs that we want to produce of live resin, hydrocarbon is a fantastic option for that. What's great about hydrocarbon and rosin is that you can use fresh frozen material, capturing those lower boiling point terpenes and more exquisite elements of the cannabis plant. With hydrocarbon extraction, all of our systems are going to be closed loop, which is obviously the industry standard at this point. Everything is also PSI peer reviewed, so they're ready for implementation into your facilities. We have some new hydrocarbon extraction products that are going to be coming out. They're all passive recovery that will be released in this next quarter here. I definitely keep your eyes open for those. They have exceeded all of our benchmarks in our testing, so we're pretty excited about that. But generally speaking, hydrocarbon extraction has a pretty I would say one of the most prevalent places in our industry, just because it's been around for a long time. People started doing it with butane cans and doing an open blasting. And I'm sure some of us can reminisce about those days. But today it's obviously a much more controlled process. So having those engineering third-party peer reviews, proper containment inside of a C1D1 extraction booth, all those things are things that we can help provide. And having a one-stop shop really will help you implement these different types of control procedures, compliance, all that kind of stuff into your facility from the ground up. On the alcohol extraction front, we have obviously the centrifuge that you can see on the screen here, as well as a lot of different solvent recovery options. Through that process, we can produce bulk crude oil, which is going to be the primary method, or alcohol will be the primary method for that. We do have some other methods as well, but currently hydrocarbon and alcohol are going to be the main ones aside from solventless extraction methods. Cascade Sciences, some of you might have seen the big blue ovens, and Mary with her chipper videos and awesome tech that she's posted online. Cascade makes an array of different sized vacuum ovens for vacuum purging. You can see some of the different sizes and configurations here, as well as we also have forced air convection ovens. Those can be used for drying material, decarboxylation before CO2 extraction, an array of different purposes there. We also have bead baths, which are a good alternative to using direct heating, similar to a double boiler, but instead of using a double boiler with water, you can just have these beads, which is a much cleaner and safer way to heat things up without having open heating elements. Post-processing equipment as well. Cascade offers a variety of different glassware alongside Lab Society to fill all the different niches inside of your lab. So distillation. So kind of going to just dive into it here. So there's two different main categories for distillation methodology. Distillation methodologies utilized in our industry. One's going to be benchtop short bath distillation and thin film distillation. One is going to be batch and the other one is continuous. So what's nice about having the batch distillation systems is that they're simple. They have great batch and data tracking. They're simple to clean and minimize contamination. They're great for high boiling point compounds. They're efficient and economical. You can get into one of these for a fraction of the price versus a continuous system, produce the same end quality products, and do it within a small footprint inside of your laboratory. They're also great for benchmarking for continuous systems. So in other words, running material through this almost as a qualifier prior to running it into a larger system. This is especially helpful on the hemp side of things. Elite Lab, which is Lab Society's software platform that we've developed, which is now going to be implemented across all of our division products, which is really exciting, is one of the core, I would say, benefits and value adds to our systems compared to the other ones in the market. We're able to connect all of our digital temperature controllers and monitors to one source, control everything from one screen, and have all of that data tracked. So going forward, that data will help with business intelligence, laboratory optimization, and all of the different control of all the products that are inside of your lab to help really create the best return on investment for your capital expenditure equipment, as well as going forward, optimizing your operating expenses. So here's some of our different units. You can see we have everything from smaller R&D scale up to the 20-liter G3XR, various economies of scale. I would say right now, for a lot of the cannabis, like THC style facilities opening up in newer states, a lot of people are looking in the 5 to 12-liter range, whereas in the more prominent and matured markets, the 20-liter units are going to be more utilized, especially on the hemp side. So why via thin film? So thin film would be the counterpart that is continuous to the benchtop systems. What's nice about these is they're continuous. So you feed liquid in and out comes liquid or different fractions at all times versus doing it in a batch. There's a lot shorter residence time inside of the actual evaporator, which protects the thermally sensitive compounds. And it's great for high boiling point compounds. And these are extremely efficient. Essentially, the best way to think about a thin film versus a short path is that instead of, collecting all of your fractions during one batch by rising temperature incrementally, dynamically, throughout the process, you're actually going to have those steps, those ramps parsed out into specific stages of distillation where we're pulling off specific compounds based on static temperatures. So here's some of our different wiped film distillation units. We have the Cannabis 4, which is getting released actually like right now, basically. We had it in Vegas last year at Lab Society's booth. That unit was completely designed for cannabis and has a lot of amazing features on it that help with cannabis processing at a small to medium scale. That unit will do up to 5 liters per hour throughput from testing. We're going to probably try to push it a little harder. Comes standard with the Elite Lab core HMI system, which is it's basically a PLC that connects to all of the different temperature controllers and recirculators, as well as all the gear motors to control the flow rate through the system. Then we have the Hive series, which are going to be more of your economical and modular, almost like Legos, as we like to call it at Lab Society for wiped film. You can really build these things in a whole bunch of different directions, being that they're built on an 80-20 frame, and they're very economical for the price point and modular. And then we've got the larger multi-stage distillation units that we do with in-kind process systems, IPS. Those systems are going to range in anywhere from 5 to 20 liters per hour up to 10 to 60 liters per hour, which is obviously a tremendous amount of throughput. Typically, we're going to see those more installed on the hemp side of things versus the cannabis side of things. But the end goal is that we've got a solution for every size, every market that is out there. So, hit us up for more information on these. We're happy to explore all the different options with you.
So now talking about what some of these products are that can be made. So anything under the sun, we can pretty much handle when it comes to cannabis concentrates. Like I said before, the maturity of the market that you're in is going to really help dictate what can be sold in that market, starting out primarily with flower sales. The first year you're seeing huge amounts of flower sales, and then that starts to transition into edibles and some of the simpler products. But if you come in right out the gate and you're trying to sell dabbable concentrates into the first dispensary in a new market, a lot of people aren't even going to know what this is. And so here we've got an example of some ice water hash that you could sell full melt hash. And then here's something that has been pressed with the rosin press to make rosin. And so you can see kind of the before and after. Both of these are SKUs that can be sold as a dabbable concentrate, meaning that somebody would scoop it up and vaporize it. Here we've got some solventless butter and a solventless vaporizer pen. Obviously, vaporizer cartridges can be made with any one of these processes. We've got some waxes and butters, some diamonds and sauce over here. And then this would be, I believe, CBD isolate, right?
Crude oil.
Crude oil, okay. But the idea being that, there's a lot of different things that you can come to market with, and your strategy on which those are, the order that you do it with, and how these SKUs play together. Because sometimes, let's say if you're running a solventless lab and you really want to make vaporizer pens here, I might have diamonds as one of my byproducts of making a vaporizer pen. So thinking about what your byproducts are and utilizing all of those efficiently is extremely important and can really determine whether or not you make money.
Absolutely. And one of the big takeaways is, like Ben said, we can really help you make any sort of different product at this point. There's a lot of stigmas revolving around solvent extraction. Something that we've learned over time is that if it's done correctly with clean solvents from the beginning, it can be just as clean as anything else. So what's beautiful is that you can really look at different economies of scale, different barriers to entry, different capital expenditure requirements, and formulate to create all those different products on the last page in so many different economies of scale. So when it comes down to making those products and how we sell them in the market, GMP, good manufacturing practice, is something that you're probably hearing more and more about. In Europe and Canada, it's actually somewhat of a standard because they're typically ahead of the game when it comes to the pharmaceutical world than us. But the whole idea is that there are regulations that require a quality approach to manufacturing, and this minimizes contamination, mix-ups, and errors, which obviously protects the consumer. So in order to become GMP, it's not something, a lot of people ask, hey, is that piece of equipment GMP certified or compliant, whatever? It can be GMP compliant. In other words, it can be utilized within a GMP procedure or GMP process, but the equipment itself does not have a GMP certification. That's not how it works. So if you were to purchase a piece of equipment and you wanted to implement it into a GMP process, you'd want to ensure that the person that or the manufacturer that you're purchasing the equipment from has the appropriate documentation to support that process. Through that, you're going to have record keeping, personnel qualifications, sanitation, cleanliness, equipment verification, process validation, and handling compliance. All of these elements help to create GMPs, which GMPs are what you would actually be implementing and following in your facility. So GMP considerations in cannabis hemp. What's really interesting about cannabis and hemp is that it's both, it can be a food where we're eating it as an edible. It can also be a pharmaceutical where it's put inside of a pill or a soft gel. So realistically, there's a blurred line as to whether it's going to be GMPs revolving around food processing and or pharmaceutical. A lot of companies are choosing to do both depending on where they are in their process. So this is a very important thing to be thinking about when you're designing your facility, one, and two, when you're selecting your equipment.
And to play off of that, as Mike said, the whole point of GMP is to make sure that the end product that the consumer is handling is safe, pure, effective, and of the highest quality. And so they want to make sure in order for that to happen, it comes down to traceability and accountability through every process all the way from seed to sale, right? And so making sure that not just the equipment, but the processes that are in place within your facility are going to meet those standards, something that we can help you guys develop. It's not, GMP isn't something that can be bought. It's something that is earned and practiced day to day. And that's something that we can help you with. So you've got DQ, which is design qualification. So showing that a piece of technology, it has a compliant design, right? Then we've got IQ, installation qualification. So verifying the alignments with design specifications. Operational qualification, we're verifying alignment with functional specifications. And then performance qualification, verification of the ability of a process to meet user required specifications. And so again, this is something that we can help kind of as much or as little as you want, but there are resources here at Agrify to help customers find solutions to these questions.
Excellent. So amongst all of our different capital expenditure pieces of equipment for processing the cannabis itself into different products and hemp, of course, we also work with analytical testing equipment. So and this really falls into the GMP conversation perfectly, because in order to become GMP, you have to have quality assurance and quality control at every step of the process. That requires in-house testing. So right now in the US, a lot of companies aren't even really thinking about this, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll invest in that in the future. And they rely on third-party testing, which is totally fine. It makes sense. However, when you look at third-party testing, the costs of it, and not only that, the potential risks associated in terms of your own internal operation, it also extends the timeline to market. There's a lot of things that third-party testing is absolutely required in order to sell a product in the market, but that doesn't mean you can't test it 5 or 6 times before you get to that point. So we can test for pretty much any of the different cannabinoids. The methods that are developed are the ones that you can see right there. We can test everything from potency, residual solvents, terpene analysis, pesticides, heavy metals, microbials, and just general mass spec analysis. And then there's an array of different instruments. All those different instruments help to provide results that fall into the categories in the center. So does every lab need all of these devices? No. Do all labs need probably an HPLC for potency testing? Probably. That helps you at least verify what's inside of the material going on to the next step. So coming in the future, I would definitely expect this to become a big subject in the space, just because in order to hit GMP, you're going to have in-house testing. Another example really quick is, there's a lot of pesticides, heavy metals that can be present in cannabis, and that's due to several factors. One being that it's a bioaccumulator. The whole genus of cannabis is known to pull certain types of contaminants out of the ground, out of the soil, and actually accumulate it within the biomass itself. So this poses a problem during the extraction process, because if the extraction method doesn't, or also extracts, if you will, the contaminants, now those contaminants are going to be concentrated in higher quantity inside of your extract. So what do you do at that point? If you had an entire field that got contaminated with arsenic, is that going to become trash? Well, it sure as hell will be if you end up getting it third-party tested and report that to your local jurisdiction. Now, if you had in-house testing and you had proper remediation tactics, which, just so you all know, there's definitely ways to remediate different extracts and whatnot throughout the different process that render the final product completely free of any contamination, and would actually preserve the initial quality of the starting material. So having that in-house testing allows you to choose that pathway versus being forced into a box of, hey, I got to destroy all this material and lose a whole quarter's worth of earnings. So it's just something to think about. Obviously, implementing those pesticide removal or heavy metal remediation technologies is crucial. It's another thing that we can help with as well at Agrify, but definitely something to be thinking about.
And to add on to that, when you send it out for third-party testing in some jurisdictions, there is no going back from that. Once they see it, now you're on the hit list, and that's not where you want to be. So having these tools and catching it yourself and doing something about it is a very different thing to them than sending it out for qualification.
Perfect adder there. So to top off, the analytics side, going back to Elite Lab gives us control, automation, repeatability, and metrics throughout all of our processes. Right now, Ben and I are making it one of our big priorities to get Elite Lab implemented across the entire fleet of products for Agrify, so that we can at least collect data. We may not necessarily control, for instance, on the hydrocarbon systems. If we want to implement controls, that would obviously be a whole redesign and a much more expensive, costly machine, but pulling data from it is a low-hanging fruit that we can achieve in the short term. So I would say over the next 6 to 12 months, you'll start to see a lot of our products are going to start having Elite Lab as the backbone in terms of software and data management, which will also port into more business intelligence, automation, and also even into some level of protection of your equipment. So, a lot of times with vacuum pumps, they start to, and if any of you have used a vacuum pump, you'll know this, especially an oil-based pump, eventually the oil in the pump, you have to change it because it gets contamination in it and it stops operating correctly. How great would it be if your software told you, hey, you need to change the pump oil? And if you've done it a certain number of times, it says, hey, we need to buy more pump oil. So that's another thing that we're really trying to create in the future of our software, is to really help you run your lab more efficiently and without having to think so much about every little piece of the lab. There's a lot of things to think about.
So as we've kind of talked about sporadically here, we do have consulting services. This is going to vary kind of as much or as little as you want. We can come into your facility and show you, actually set up the equipment and give you floor plans. We can help you through the build process all the way up through actually operating the equipment, and going from raw material to a specific SKU. And we can hold your hand through that process. We can also do remote video training. I won't get into a whole bunch of this now because we're sort of running out of time, but we do have a ton of services for consulting that we can offer. I would encourage you to reach out to us. We do offer a lot of times free evaluation of where you're at, and we can get you an idea of what you need to move forward and put a proposal for you together for you for that. Also, Mike just touched on this, but consumables and making sure that you have all the little things that it takes to run your lab on a day-to-day, and making sure that not just you are stocked on it, but we're stocked on it, and communicating with you on when you need to restock. So we're working on automating that process, but in the meantime, we do have a huge line of solutions for consumables and just-in-time delivery. And that is the end of the presentation today. And I think we'll just open it up for questions at this time. And thanks for all your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you, Ben and Mike, for that presentation. I know we've got a few questions lined up already, but would certainly point the audience to, again, that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. This first question is kind of maybe a variation on what are some of the starting points from working with the Agrify team in particular? What sort of questions guide this process? But I'll read the question real quick. This person's asking, what solventless extraction methods and equipment would you suggest for small scale businesses and for those performing extractions with hemp? So there's a couple parts there, but generally would be interested to know, I guess, how does your team begin the partnership process?
Yeah, so we have our training group that actually does evaluations called Pure Cannabis. So typically if you're coming in with no experience and you want a full suite of solutions, we'll send you to our Pure Cannabis team and they'll evaluate your situation, and we can get a lab plan together looking at how much material you need to process and what SKUs you want to make. From there, we're going to make equipment recommendations that are going to be scalable. So a lot of really small scale processors would like to start out doing this ice water extraction. And nice thing about that is you could buy a vessel and a paddle and you could do that manually. And then as you grow, you can add an access system and you'll be able to use that same vessel that you purchased earlier. Now you're plugging it into an automated system. And then you can start out with maybe a small harvest right freeze dryer. And as you grow, you can add a second one of those. And really having multiple freeze dryers does help with the timing of that process. So we can help you kind of time all this for what you need now, as well as look at what you're trying to do in maybe 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 months, whatever it might be, and make sure that what you're buying today doesn't get thrown out a year from now.
So Ben, question for you, kind of to piggyback off of your explanation and this person's question. How much experience have you guys had on the solventless side with hemp? Is the pressing and ice water hash, is that going to be effective with hemp? I know that a lot of times it's very different based on the source material.
Yeah, no, great question. When it comes to ice water extraction on hemp, that is challenging right now. As I was saying, the trichome structure, we haven't really had all of these years of growers promoting the growth of a better hemp. We have for cannabis because they've wanted that higher THC content. And so until recently, we haven't had the desire to create a better trichome structure within the hemp plant. And so we're seeing that different extraction methods are going to be better. Right now, we're definitely leaning towards SIFT for hemp extraction. But as those genetics improve over time, we're going to see the ice water extraction becoming more viable solution.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, in terms of, I would say a lot of Lab Society's historic clientele were hemp customers. A lot of people are using alcohols just because you can bulk extract and not have, and in the end, you're going to be going to distillate anyway. So having that super high quality extract on the front end isn't usually of concern to most hemp extractors. Plus, by the time we get through the distillation process, the material is going to be rendered solvent free at that point. So we do actually have a solventless extraction method for hemp that is completely different than the rosin or pressing or washing process. It's actually used with hot air. It's through a partner of ours, and if you're interested in that, Letitia, we're happy to discuss that with you or anyone at all.
Fantastic. And sort of a related question, I know we were talking about the phrase washing well earlier and source material in general. Certainly we're just talking about it there with hemp. Obviously, the trichomes play an important role in solvent-based extraction. Are there certain genetic families or certain, phenotypes that growers might want to really identify if they're going to go down that road of solvent-based extraction?
You mean solventless extraction?
Well, I know with solventless, it's a little tougher. I was going to shift over to solvent-based, where those trichome heads and the resin becomes even more important. If there are certain genetic types or sort of families of strains that might be helpful to keep in mind.
I know that for solventless extraction, typically, I mean, I don't know if this is a good way to put it, but the cookie style strains, the ones that are more dry to the touch almost, seem to be better for that type of extraction method. When it comes to solvent, what's useful is that in all reality, you can kind of extract any type of strain effectively through the solvent-based extraction. That's what makes the solventless extraction more of a artisan and boutique method, where you have to you have to kind of grow for the extraction. Whereas with the solvent-based extraction methods, the strain doesn't matter as much. It's going to be more about the input quality for your end result. So obviously we want material that's going to be high in terpene content. It's going to be high in cannabinoid content that's been handled appropriately. And then that will yield us with the best solvent-based extraction yields.
And when it comes to solventless, we have been compiling, and we do have a list of strains that have historically proven to wash well. Compiling that data is definitely on my list to go down that route of which phenotypes and what can we do to promote this. Now that we've got resources like that within Agrify, that's definitely something that we're going to be working on later this year. But right now, what we've done is just taken a lot of data from our customers and compile that for our future customers that are looking for specific strains to go after.
Awesome. I know toward the end of the presentation there, we had a couple slides on thin film versus short path distillation. One audience member is asking about the distinct advantages between one or the other.
Yeah, so what's really great about the two different methods is that they both have pros and cons, and they both have a place inside of a laboratory. I shortly mentioned that you can actually use the benchtop distillation units to qualify material for the thin film. So they can work conjunctively. In all reality, they are going to produce the same end products, or at least very similar, depending on the initial material going in. The main advantage of a thin film versus a benchtop unit would be that, firstly, just to clarify, they are both short paths. In all reality, the thin film is actually the true short path. And then we kind of have this industry misnomer calling the benchtop units short paths. They're really not short paths. In fact, the path is like this long on most of them. So it's more of a medium path, if you will. The whole point is that the distillation units themselves are designed for high boiling point compounds. High boiling point compounds that are thermally sensitive. So now we talk about the true advantage of a thin film versus a benchtop. A benchtop, you're going to be filling it up with a quantity of crude oil from the beginning of your run, and it's going to be sitting in that boiling flask for sometimes up to 4 to 8 hours. That entire time it's being exposed to heat. It's under vacuum, so it's not being exposed to oxygen, but it is being exposed to heat. Typically we don't see much conversion on the first or second pass through a benchtop unit, but once you get into subsequent further passes, you may see actually a loss in potency because of the cannabinoids degrading into other compounds. So the huge advantage for a thin film distillation unit is that the residence time, the actual exposure to heat, is extremely short, somewhere between 3 and 30 seconds, depending on how the user is running the machine. So extremely short time. Now, the disadvantage is that if it's a single stage wiped film or thin film distillation unit, you'll have to do multiple passes through the machine in order to achieve your final distillate product. Whereas on the benchtop unit, you'd actually produce your end product off of the first pass typically. So, or through one run. So those are really I would say the biggest differentiators. There's obviously a few more to that. But I would say the residence time, the number of passes, and the expense are the three main reasons people decide one technology over the other. For the thin films, they're also going to be more costly. So a lot of times you're going to spend a whole lot of money and you're going to be producing the same amount of material that one of the benchtop units can do in 8 hours.
Certainly. A couple terms I wanted to just touch on for maybe some additional elaboration while we're here. One, maybe relating to space requirements that we mentioned at the top of the presentation. And that phrase or term would be the C1D1 booth. If someone's already in this world, I'm sure they're familiar, but for those who are interested in getting into it, could you maybe elaborate on what that looks like and what the requirements are?
Sure. So C1D1 extraction booths are obviously most of the time they're prefabricated. There's an array of different companies. We actually sell them through the Precision business unit. And these units essentially are designed to minimize / almost eliminate completely the chance for any sort of explosion. They're controlled environments where the airflow, there's specific airflow requirements so that it's discharging the air in the room and cycling the air in the room at a certain rate. All of the electronics inside of the C1D1 enclosure must also be C1D1 rated. In other words, they are rated for use inside of one of these high airflow, very explosion proof booths. So the main objective is to minimize the chance of any fire or explosion hazard as a result of using the solvent-based extraction methods. So these units are usually typically, again, they're prefabricated. They can come in an array of different sizes. They can be implemented into existing facilities. Sometimes I think we actually also sell outdoor ones that come in a trailer / Connex container. So there's a lot of different options around in the market for these, but when you're doing any sort of solvent-based extraction, you're looking at most likely having a minimum of a C1D2 environment, which C1D2 would be more applicable to alcohol extractions. And then C1D1 is going to be those gaseous hydrocarbon extractions.
Excellent. Another term I wanted to flag from earlier in the presentation is bottlenecks. And we can all sort of imagine what that means, but we've been sitting here talking about the right partners and how to find beneficial partners. Flipping that around on its head, certainly operators may wind up with bad partners or just partners who don't fit from time to time. With regard to those bottlenecks to watch out for, those red flags, what might that often look like, and how can operators sort of identify them and maybe walk away from those tough situations?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of times it really comes down to just the relationship and open communication. You know, that today we've got ridiculous amounts of supply chain issues, and you know, somebody might sell you a product that they don't actually have and communicate that later on, or you know, you might have a product that you need to operate and then you don't have the consumables or the spare part to keep that operating. These are things that at first might not seem important, but can very quickly turn itself upside down. And so, you know, ask those questions, make sure that you've got the answers that you want to hear and not something wishy-washy.
Definitely. And in regards to the bottlenecks, you know, there's a lot of times when, you know, especially when you're buying equipment from different people, you know, if those vendors aren't communicating, you know, I could be selling you a front-end extraction piece of equipment. Let's just say we're selling you a precision centrifuge, right? And we know that it does 40 pound, the CX40 does 40 pounds per run, right? Now we are going to generate a certain amount of alcohol, a certain amount of product that needs to be filtered, and a certain amount of product that needs to go through solvent recovery. If you were purchasing the solvent recovery equipment and filtration equipment from a different supplier, now if there's it's up to you to make sure that you're sizing appropriately so that you don't create a bottleneck for yourself. You're not going to have all these drums of alcohol being produced because you don't have enough solvent recovery or filtration. Same thing on the distillation side, and really deciding where you want to be and providing that to us up front allows us to create a solution for you that goes from end to end with no bottlenecks. And it does happen more often than you'd think. I mean, especially earlier on in the equipment supply space, you know, even some manufacturers that were trying to do that full solution, they weren't thinking from that perspective. They were just like, okay, well, this is how you do this step, this is how you do this step, this is how you do this step. And sell all that equipment, shows up in the lab, everybody's running, and they're like, wait a minute, why we can't filter this stuff fast enough to keep up with this machine over here. So now we have to stop producing as much, and we didn't hit all the numbers that we put into our financial model. So all of those factors, I think, are really, really important when you're choosing a supplier. And there's other suppliers, obviously, in the space that do this. And I think that that's the key when you're actually making that choice, is making sure that you're covering yourself from seed to sale.
Sure. Well, I know we're up against the hour, but I did want to end with just I guess sort of a general question. We had an audience member asking about pricing estimates. So just in a general sense, where can folks go to, you know, obviously we have some URLs on the screen. Where can folks go to learn more about the pricing aspects here?
So I would say give us a call. We have on Precision's site and on Lab Study site, we have different forms online that you can fill out to inquire with us, or give us a call to one of our business units, and we'd happy to get a solutions architect up on the phone so that we can start putting together a plan for you and start giving you some rough pricing. Most of our sales team members are at least educated enough to give rough estimates prior to going through the full build process, but happy to give as much information as we can.
Fantastic. Well, I'd certainly like to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, we'll be distributing the recorded audio and video to everybody via email. We'll keep an eye out for that in a couple of days. And to Ben and Mike and the full Agrify team, I want to thank you guys. That was a fantastic presentation. Covered a lot of great ground there.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And thank you, Ben. That was great, man. I think that was Ben in my first co-presentation. So we're excited to do a lot more of these.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Later, guys.